Today's ancient witness is a little long, so you might want to read with me a good story. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you, so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." She said to her, "All that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin." He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask, for all the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman. But now, though it is true that I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as next of kin for you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to act as next of kin to you, then as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin to you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before one person could recognize another. For he said, "It must not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." Then he said, "Bring the cloak you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her back. Then he went into the town. She came to her mother-in-law, who said, "How did things go with you, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, for he said, 'Do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today."
And so we pray that through these ancient stories and our time together, through the music, through the silence, that we may sense the presence of the one who is not far from any of us. So this is the 3rd installment of our series on Ruth. And I want to start out by saying, we throw around some words so easily, and not just these days, but through the ages. Words like love, I love you, seems to kind of roll off our lips easily, but often carries with it no real dedication. And the word religious is often used to describe someone who does not do certain things, who follows certain rules, such as going to church, or someone who is nice or kind. Some more of those too easily used words. And as I said, for the first 2 sermons, I talked about this one word in the Hebrew called hesed, which means loyalty or devotion. And we've seen that hesed is a divine quality, and that it involves a special caring for the afflicted and the forgotten ones in our society. But in this story today, we see that being truly kind involves risk. To be truly loving means commitment. And to be truly loyal involves courage. And so, as I mentioned in the story, if you don't know anything about the Ruth and Naomi story, it starts out Naomi and her husband Elimelech are in Bethlehem, and they're in Bethlehem, and they experience this famine. And so, like many refugees, many immigrants, they leave this desperate situation of poverty and hunger, and they go to Moab. And once Naomi and Elimelech get to Moab, they have sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and with them. And Elimelech passes away, but Mahlon and Chilion take these two Moabite wives in this land that they're in, and that's Orpah and Ruth. And then Mahlon and Chilion die, and so all that's left are Naomi, and then her daughters-in-law, who probably she doesn't know that well, Ruth and Orpah. And so then Naomi says, "Look, I'm a lost cause," and she goes back to Bethlehem, and she tells the two daughters-in-law, save yourself. You're young. You'll find security. You'll find new husbands. But Ruth would not leave Naomi. She clung to her. She was extremely loyal to Naomi, and they went back together to Bethlehem. And so that's where they are now. That's where the story picks up. And so in these previous scenes, we've seen how these two destitute, childless widows travel from Moab to Judah. And then when they arrive in Bethlehem, they're allowed to glean from the fields. And that's what last sermons was about, where they were able to go out into the fields and pick up all the scraps, that didn't get harvested. And when they're there, they receive special notice from a man who took care of them. And now that the harvest time is over, this question is, okay, now what? Now what's going to happen? And so Act 3 opens with Naomi and Ruth devising a dangerous and delicate plan. And so Naomi says to Ruth, we have to find you a husband. Here is what you should do. After Boaz has finished working, and after he has, that's my child up there. Take it easy. All right. And so we have to find you a husband. And after Boaz has finished working, he had eaten and he had drunk and he was feeling no pain. And he'll lie down. Then, Naomi says to Ruth, then what you do is get yourself all decked out, and then you go down there to the threshing floor and get under the covers with him. And then when he wakes up, then he'll tell you what to do. And so Ruth, by the way, this is a PG-13 story. This is not a Sunday school thing. So Ruth does that, and so Boaz ate and drank, and it says he was in a contented mood, perhaps slightly inebriated. Now, if you're picking up on some sexual overtones here, you are absolutely correct. After all, Ruth is jumping into bed with Boaz. And the text talks about uncovering his feet and lying down. And you have to understand that the word in Hebrew, feet, is a euphemism for genitals. Maybe you didn't know that. So this is not a G-rated story. And so she sneaks down there, and at midnight, Boaz, turns over, and who are you? I am Ruth, she says, your servant. And then instead of waiting for Boaz to tell her what to do, she tells him, she says, spread your wings or your cloak over your servant, for you are a redeemer or next of kin. And what is probably happening is that Ruth is proposing marriage. Because often to spread one's cloak over someone is to marry them. That's part of the ceremony in ancient Israel. They take this cloak and they put them over both. In ancient Israelite culture, marriage was less to do with romance and more to do with economic dependence and survival. And the words husband and wife carry with them connotations of marriage today that just weren't there back then. In fact, you probably didn't know this, but there are no words for husband and wife in the entire Hebrew Bible. Rather, there are only words for man and woman. So the translation is literally something like Naomi's man or the woman of Boaz. And so this kind of gets at the idea that marriage was not so much a feeling, it was an arrangement. See? Now, old Boaz was flattered that young Ruth would choose him over the young men of the area. But then he recognizes something. He says, this instance of loyalty is better than the first. Now, once again, he sees Ruth acting as the very embodiment of hesed, or loyalty. Because by marrying Boaz, Elimelech's, that's Ruth's deceased husband, Elimelech's inheritance is then kept in the family, and both Ruth and Naomi would be provided for. So this proposal to Boaz was helping to ensure the insecurity for Naomi. If Ruth married somebody else, Naomi would be left out in the cold. And so Boaz sees this and appreciates Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. And as in previous encounters, Boaz responds himself with kindness and caring, asking her to stay, yet having her leave before the morning is fully dawned to prevent a possible scandal. Before she leaves, he lavishes even more gifts of grain and food on her to show his goodwill and generosity. And so once again, we see in Ruth a new definition of loyalty or hesed. In Ruth, we see a kind of transcendence. We see Ruth in all her humanity. As Frederick Buechner said, decked out in her Sunday best and smelling of seductive scents, fumbling around in the dark to lie down at tipsy Boaz's feet. Yet is especially here in this slightly ridiculous couple that we can see the very presence of God. We see it in Ruth's bold initiative, in her audacity, and in her courage. Like Abraham, also a foreign traveler, she breaks with the past and leaves it behind and embraces the risky promise of the future. So Boaz calls Ruth, quote, a woman of power. Now, some translations put a different spin on these words by reading that Ruth is a worthy or virtuous woman. I think these words can lead us in a different direction as we deal with the text. A woman of virtue or worth connotes kind of passive qualities, but Ruth is anything but passive. No, Ruth is a woman of power, a woman of valor, a woman of bravery and courage. In our story, it takes a vulnerable refugee woman to show us what those qualities are. It redefines power. Now, there are a couple of things going on here that we need to be aware of. First, there was in those days the practice of levirate marriage, which said that the surviving brother had to marry the wife of the deceased brother so that she could have children and so that she could be provided for. So this was called the obligation of the brother-in-law. The word liver actually means brother-in-law. So how the law might apply to Boaz is not clear. But second, we talked before about the law of the Redeemer. You remember that when someone falls in hard times, the next of kin is responsible to protect that person, according to Hebrew law. It is also unclear where Boaz stands legally here. He even mentions to Ruth that there is at least one other who is actually more closely related than he is, who is the actual next of kin. And so the case is pretty weak. And if he wanted to, Boaz could certainly have his lawyer find some loopholes to avoid this obligation. He's not legally obliged. Yet, this is a story about grace overcoming law and loyalty defeating legalism. Ruth does not base her life upon legal obligation. If that were the case, she would have left Naomi long ago. Rather, Ruth lives according to the basic principle of caring and kindness that is behind the law. This is what true Hesed living is about. It's about going beyond the call of duty, beyond the letter of the law. It's about following the spirit of the law. You know, as Paul said, the letter of the law kills, but the spirit gives life. Indeed, it's about following the spirit of life. Ruth is not appealing to Boaz's legal sense. She's appealing to his heart, to what is good and kind and loving. She's making God's appeal. As you remember, the story of Ruth begins, it says, in the days when the judges ruled, or when legal matters were properly handled. And yet, there was something missing. And so the Spirit of God called people beyond the call of duty, beyond mere human loyalty, to a divine loyalty and to a kindness and steadfast love that is transcendent. In Act 2, Boaz was moved by this Spirit in Ruth, and he said, "May the Holy One reward you for your deeds, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." And so perhaps Ruth remembered those words, and now Boaz's pious wish in the field comes back to him, and she says, "Spread your wings over your servant." Ruth makes him responsible for protecting them. So we might ask ourselves, what do we piously wish for? This reminds me of a story. One day, as he began his daily prayer, a desert master saw pass by a cripple, a beggar, and a beaten man. And seeing them, this holy person went into a deep prayer and cried, "Great God, how is it that a loving Creator can see such suffering and yet do nothing about it?" And out of the depths of his prayer, God says, "I have done something about it. I made you." God works through us a loyalty, a steadfast love, which is an extension of God. It is by working through human hearts that God's protection is made real to others. We are the body of Christ, the hands and the feet to make God's love felt in this world. God is working through this congregation, as we show loyalty to each other, hesed to each other, as we stick together, as we are here for one another, as we hold on in community even tighter when the storms toss us around. God is working through this congregation where we are in solidarity with our sisters and brothers who have been intimidated and silenced, condemned and abused, when we bind ourselves with the gay and lesbian, the bisexual, transgendered and non-binary persons everywhere who suffer discrimination and spiritual violence. God is working through this congregation when we preach or pray or march or proclaim that sexual orientation or gender identification has nothing to do with sin, that any understanding that they are inherently sinful doesn't serve the love of God, but only reinforces cultural prejudice, ignorance, and fear. And God is working through this congregation whenever we show devotion to those in need, whenever we collect food for the hungry, whenever we show hospitality to homeless families, whenever we give protection and support to refugees, whenever we work for justice at home or far away, whenever we are moved to loving kindness for those who are hurt. God's loyalty, God's hesed to all works through us. We see this in Ruth, who became a redeemer for Naomi. She now calls Boaz to be her redeemer. This non-Israelite, this non-believer calls the believer to task. And as it was demanded of Boaz, perhaps protection and redemption may be demanded of us from an outsider as well. In Ruth's bold venture, we see a quality, a willingness to provide the one more thing, to go that step beyond. Not only is this quality demanded of us, we may also demand it of each other. We may count on someone to make God's protection real to us. Something extra is needed, and Ruth shows us what this something extra is about. This something extra beyond the call of duty goes to the heart of what faith is all about, what hesed or kindness or loyalty is all about, what grace is all about. God shows this something extra in not abandoning humankind, not abandoning us, and going beyond the call of duty with us. God's loyalty and steadfast love is demonstrated in the life of Jesus, who stood up for justice, who bound himself to the marginalized and the oppressed, who stubbornly held on and would not let go. Even when he faced torture and death, he was loyal. He held on. He did not let go. Praise Christ. Praise God.